Hi, this is Kathi Quinn with Floriani. Floriani is a division of R&K Distributing, and I want to welcome you to this week's Project of the Week. I've promised for the last couple of weeks that we would look at how to split a design. So that's what we're going to do this week. So the first thing you need to do when you're going to split a design is, of course, we need a design. So I'm going to come, and I went to my library. I went into my June 2015, and then I hovered over my designs folder, and I'm going to pull in my postage stamp flag. Now I'm going to look at this. Now this design is only little less than 4 inches tall and about 3 inches wide. But what I want to do is the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to enlarge the design. So let's go ahead and do that to start with. So I'm going to come into my sequence view and select all items. And with that, of course, I will tell you, since I brought it in from my library, it's already grouped. So I wouldn't have needed to go and select all items. But we're going to go just like it was any regular design that we might have been working on, and we're going to select all items so it is all highlighted. And now I'm going to transform or resize my design. So I'm going to come in here and go to transform, and I am going to make this design, I'm going to say let's make it 8 inches tall. Now I've got maintain aspect ratio selected, so it will enlarge proportionately. So let's put our 8, and let's apply this to the design. Now with this applied, I'm going to tell it to fit to screen, and I am going to ungroup this design. So we're going to move right up here to our ungroup icon. Now with that done, I am going to look at the design. Now the biggest issue you have when you enlarge a design is you want to check your satin stitches, because just because we make a satin stitch larger doesn't mean it's going to stitch out properly. Remember, Walter's rule, if this was going to go on a knit, that satin stitch shouldn't be wider than 7 millimeters. Now, if you're putting it on a stable fabric such as a canvas, a denim, a heavy cotton, you could probably go 8 or 9 millimeters wide. But I pretty much stick with Walter's rule. So the first thing I want to look at is the different parts of this design. So I'm going to close my properties just for a moment by clicking on the X, so that my sequence view is large and I've got plenty of room to look at it. Now I'm going to click on my down arrow, and I notice that this is a fill, this is a fill, this is a fill, but right here I've got a satin path right in here. Well, I moved that fill and I didn't mean to. There we go. I've got a satin path. So I'm going to select my satin path, and I'm going to come over to my left-hand toolbar and left mouse click on the ruler. Now it's stuck to my cursor, so we know we're measuring. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down my left mouse key and drag this the width. Now notice this says tip, use a fill. So this is telling me right here that this is really too wide to be a satin, but it is a satin. So we're going to take this satin, and I'm going to tell you the bottom satin is going to be the same problem, and we're going to change that from a satin to a fill stitch. Now I'm going to grab this top fill. I'm going to go ahead and click back on my properties icon, and this tells me this is a satin fill. So even though this is a fill, you notice it's a satin. So that means it is a satin stitch. So again, let me measure. And this also says to use a fill. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here, and holding down my control key, I am going to select all my fills. I'm going to select all the segments in this red. Now I've got them all selected, and I'm going to come over here and I'm going to tell this that I want this to be a pattern satin, and I'm going to go with pattern I think I'm going to go with pattern 2. Okay, now once I've done that, remember I have to apply. So now those are all fill stitches, so I don't have to worry about them being too large to be a satin. Now the next problem we're going to have, and I'm going to tell you right now, is the gold. So let's move on down to our gold. And notice it's all a satin. All of our gold is a satin. And I guarantee you that this is too wide. So let's go ahead and get our ruler just to measure. And it says use a fill. Now I still want this to have kind of the look of a satin. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to leave it at satin, but I'm going to go to the word split. And I'm going to tell it I want a random split. I don't want a delineation. And I'm going to say the minimum stitch is going to be 7 millimeters and the maximum is 7 millimeters. And I'm going to apply. And what that did is that turned that satin into a random. So now when it stitches out, it's not going to have long gaping stitches because we have already had it randomized. So now that I've got those stitches taken care of, we want to split our design. Now the first thing you need to do is tell it what size hoop you're using, because if you're using a 4x4 hoop, you're going to get more splits than if you're using, say, a 5x7 and 8x8. So the first thing I need to do is pick my hoop. Now I'm going to come right here to the hoop icon and click on that down arrow, and it's going to bring up select a hoop. Now I am going to use my 10 needle for this design, so I'm going to stay with Pez, but I'm going to come up here and tell it I'm using a multi-needle. Now the reason I'm doing that is it lists different frames for a multi-needle. And of course you can always create a new frame. If your size hoop is not in here, go ahead and create a new one. Now I'm going to click on the drop down, and what I'm going to use is I'm going to use my 180 by 130, my 5x7 more or less frame. So I'm going to select that and I'm going to say OK. Now it's got that in the background, that matters not. It's going to put it up. If I wanted to turn it off, I could turn it on and off here, the little hoop above. But I'm just going to leave it. Now I'm going to go into my split function. Now the reason I pick the hoop is the program is going to split it to the hoop you have previously chosen. So make sure you pick the hoop you're going to work with prior to splitting. Now I'm simply going to left mouse click on my split icon. I'm going to say next. And you notice it has split and it's told me you've got 2 hoopings, 1 of 1 and 2 of 1, so it's one design, and it's going to split it, and it's splitting it right here in the center. Now I've told it put alignment stitches, center of the design. I've given it the overlap within the hoop, and I've told it 10 millimeters is fine, so we're good. Now I'm going to go to next. Now it's working it. It's going to split the design for me, and of course depending upon how small my hoop is, how large my design is, it's going to take a little bit of time to do this. Now that I have done that, I am going to go to, let me do this one more time. I'm going to split you, and I'm going to go to finish. For some reason it glitched off on me. So now it's telling me 1 of 1, 2 of 1, and it's showing me this is 1 of 1. This is the first piece of the design to stitch, and this is the second half of the design to stitch. So you're going to stitch this in the first hooping and this in the second hooping. So we can print that if we wish. So let's go to print. Now it's showing me the whole thing. Now, but watch. Now it's showing me this is the first half. There's the colors. Here's the second half. And again, there the colors are listed. So you can see how this is going to work. Okay, great. So you've seen the print. Now I'm going to finish. Now when I finish, it asks me, where do you want to save it? Well, I'm going to go ahead and save it on my desktop, but I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call this Flag Stamp Split. Okay, so I've got my folder, and I'm going to put this, and they just name this flag. Now I'm going to save it in the format that I want to work in. So in this case, I'm going to save it for my multi-needle, and I'm going to save. So now it's going to save the design for me. So let's look what we've done. Let's open. Let's go to the desktop. Let's go into that folder. There we go. And I'm going to pick the first design. Now when I open this, I want to explain to you how this works. Now what is going to happen, you notice you've got placement lines here and right across here. Now we're going to stitch out, and I'm going to go ahead and change the background color since I'm stitching white on white. So that'll make it a little easier for you. So we're going to come right here to our background color, and I'm going to go with color, and I'm just going to make it gray for right now. Okay, now let's watch this stitch out. We're going to stitch. Now what did it stitch first? It's going to stitch my white here. Now there's our red. Here's this. Now it's going to put my stars. It's going to do my gold. And the last thing is right across here, this line right across. Now you notice I've got placement lines here, here, and straight across here. So we've got that. Now once that is, we're going to stitch this out in the hoop. Now how we're going to line up to stitch our second half is using these placement lines. So now let's open the second half of this. Okay. In fact, well, we're going to open it and then we'll merge. I'll show you. I was thinking of a better way to show it to you. Now what's going to happen is you're going to see we're going to stitch those other two. Now we're going to come here. So what stitched first, which was very small right here, is the first thing it stitched across for us was it was going to stitch our placement line. So it's going to stitch this line first. And the reason it stitches that line first is so we can line it up right on top. We're going to use all these placement lines to line this up in our hoop, and we're going to stitch this line first so that you know it's lined up exactly. If that line stitches straight across, so it'll stitch on top of itself. So let's go over here and let's merge these. Let's file and let's merge, and let's bring in that second half. There we go. Let's come in here and let's bring in this part. Let's open. Now since I'm bringing this in this way, this is not necessarily grouped. Yes, it is. Great. So what I'm going to do here, you see the last thing that stitched here was this black line. The first thing that stitches is that same black line. So what's going to happen is in the hoop, you are going to line this up so that when it stitches right over itself, you can see how perfectly that's lined up. Now this is lined up straight down with this one. This one is lined up straight down with this one. And that's how you make sure that you are exactly correct. Now for me, I'm going to use the camera system on my tin needle to make sure that's lined up easily. That's the easiest way for me. If you're stitching on a Destiny, a Dream Machine, if you're stitching on your Quattro, your Elissimo, you're going to use a camera system. Now, if you're stitching on a Bernina, you're going to use your precise positioning. So everybody has a way in their machines today to line these lines up. But long before we had cameras or precise positioning or any of that, this is the type method we always used to line up designs. Now, in case you didn't realize, unless it's a multi-needle, on all of your machines, you can use your foot pedal for embroidery. So when you're lining this up very carefully and you're adjusting your fabric, I would use my foot pedal and let that baste one stitch at a time in case I had to kind of move and adjust just a little bit to make sure that matched straight across. And that is how you split a design in the Floriani software. And this is how you have your placement lines all in here so that you can line it back up. I hope you've enjoyed this lesson, and I hope you enjoy splitting designs. Now realize that I've picked a 5x7 for a 180 by 130 frame. You could have picked, if all your machine has is a 4x4 or a 100 by 100 hoop, you could have done that. You would have just had more hoopings than I do. So what you're going to do, again, let's just real quick review. Select your hoop by clicking the down arrow. When this comes up, you tell it what hoop you have. Now let's, just for the sake of argument, say you've come in here and your hoop isn't there. You can say new. You can pick the format. Let's say I'm going to do my Bernina. I'm going to say EXP. And I can make a description for this hoop, and I'm going to say this is my 100 by 100. I'm just making it up. So that's what I have, and I'm going to say OK. So now that hoop is going to be a custom hoop under EXP for me. So when I say OK, that hoop is going to show. Now if I had split the design using this hoop, you're probably going to get 4 hoopings. So know that pick your hoop, have your design the size you want it, go to your split icon, let your wizard split it for you, save it in your format, make a folder so you can put all your little hoopings in there. In this case, we only had the 2, but you might have had 4 or 6 depending on how big this design is. And then enjoy rehooping. I suggest you start with something simple, use a 4x4 frame, put your design a little bigger so that you can get used to lining up placement lines to do multiple hoopings to stitch out a much larger design. I'll talk to you next week. Look forward to seeing you then. Have a great week.